As crack cocaine tore through Washington, D.C., a drug gang fought to take control.
What up? Huh? Papers at?
Authorities fought back with everything they had. But gang members used any means to avoid prosecution. As the violence raged out of control, law enforcement would take back the streets.
In the early 1990s, Washington, D.C. became the murder capital of the nation. Few were left untouched by gang violence, which was ignited by the drug trade. By 1994, that violence would strike at the very heart of law enforcement. I'm Jim Kallstrom, former head of the FBI's New York office, who would fall to the FBI to lead an international manhunt and bring in the leader of the city's most vicious gang.
October 26, 1994. The nation's capital was about to become the backdrop to another bloody crime. Just before midnight, 3 masked gunmen broke into a home in the northwest section of the city.
Get up! Get up! Get up! Now! Get up!
They targeted Gerald Gaither, demanding his cash and drugs.
Where's the money? Where's the money? Where's the money? Where's it at? Where's the money?
He turned over what little money he had in his pockets.
Get up!
The owner of the home, William Ragland, was accosted while working in his basement.
Where's the money at? Get out here.
Upstairs, one of the gunmen discovered Nancy Hatchett and Darlene Hatchett, Ragland's daughter and granddaughter.
Get out there. Into the room. Go!
To convince Gaither to cooperate, the gunmen terrorized each of the residents.
Get out! Get out!
The women were ordered to lie face down on the floor.
Get out! Hands out! Tell us, come on, old man. Come on, old man. Tell us where the money is. Where is it? Where is it? No.
Gaither denied having more cash or drugs.
Put your hands down now.
One of the gunmen turned his .22 caliber handgun towards Ragland. The 89-year-old retired federal worker died instantly.
Tell us where it is. Play games.
Andre Madison, another resident, was hustled into the living room.
Shut up.
One of the 3 attackers noticed his gold necklace and ripped it from his neck.
Get down. Get out. Get out. Face down. Face down. Shut up. Shut up.
Though one man was dead, Gaither still refused to cooperate.
Get out. Get out. What are you doing?
Enraged, one of the gunmen began shooting the residents. The robbery attempt collapsed into murder. The trio quickly fled the house. One of the attackers vomited near the back door. Nancy Hatchett called 911. Officers from D.C.'s Metropolitan Police Department quickly arrived at the house, located in a known drug area. Inside, 3 people were dead. William Ragland, his granddaughter Darlene Hatchett, and Gerald Gaither. Pictures were taken of each body, and shell casings were collected. Outside, police discovered vomit near the door.
Hey, how you doing?
Nancy Hatchett and Andre Madison, the only survivors, tried to help police develop suspects. But the attackers were masked, making identification difficult.
Okay.
For Metropolitan Homicide Detective Anthony Brigadini, a check on victim Gerald Gaither suggested a possible motive.
The main victim of the triple was a drug dealer in the First and Kennedy Street area. The guy drove flashy cars, had nice clothes, had a lot of money. When the drug dealer was unable to give them enough money and or drugs, things started to get a little harried, and that's when the shootings occurred inside.
Neighbors told police that after hearing gunshots, they saw a dark-colored sedan with a loud muffler leaving the area. An all-points bulletin was issued for the vehicle and 3 men inside. One hour after the murders, 2 D.C. cops spotted a noisy vehicle that fit the report. Noticing 3 men inside the vehicle, the officers pulled over the gray Oldsmobile. The police asked the men for identification. The driver was identified as Benny Lee Lawson. The passengers were determined to be Kobe Mowat and Jermaine Graves. In one of their pants pockets, police recovered a broken gold necklace. But details from the murder scene were still incomplete. To the officers, the necklace was meaningless. After recording all of the men's names and addresses, the 3 were soon released. There was no evidence in the car to connect them to the murders. Despite the lack of solid suspects, homicide detectives believed that Gerald Gaither had been murdered by a rival drug gang. By 1990, crack cocaine had hit the streets in Washington, D.C. Neighborhood gangs began to emerge throughout the city when it became clear that there was a lot of money to be made from dealing the drug. As more and more money flowed to the gangs, they resorted to violence to protect their turf from rival drug dealers. By 1994, the nation's capital was averaging nearly 400 homicides a year. D.C. police joined forces with the FBI and several federal agencies to combat the drug-related violence. Most of the murders remained unsolved. Hoping to rattle free a lead in the triple murder, detectives began canvassing the neighborhood where the murders took place. Neighbors were too afraid to openly cooperate. Some were willing to phone in information anonymously. One tip led to Benny Lee Lawson, one of the 3 men pulled over the night of the homicides. Investigators learned that the gold necklace taken from Andre Madison matched the one officers found on one of the men in Lawson's car. Detective Brigadini questioned Lawson.
Lawson's interview lasted about 3 or 4 hours, and different detectives went in and spent some time with Lawson in an attempt to get him to provide some sort of information about his involvement in the triple murder.
Sit up. Look at me.
Lawson repeatedly denied having any knowledge of the triple murder and refused to take a polygraph test. Investigators tried to shake his story with the false threat that they could put him at the murder scene through a DNA test of the recovered vomit. Lawson remained unswayed. After 4 hours, police had no choice but to release him. Lawson's name was run through the crime database. He had been identified by police intelligence units as a member of one of D.C.'s most violent and feared street gangs. The First and Kennedy Street Crew, named after the city blocks the group lived on and controlled. Organized in 1988, the crew was involved in drug dealing, theft, kidnappings, drive-by shootings, and murder. The men with Benny Lawson the night of the murders, Kobe Mowat and Jermaine Graves, confronted him about the long hours he spent with the homicide detectives. They believed he had snitched and told the police about the gang's involvement in the triple murder. Lawson was infuriated by the accusation. He hated the police. He assured the two that he had revealed nothing to investigators. Since no arrests had been made, Graves was confident the cops had no evidence. Mowat was not as sure. He declared that he would leave the country rather than be indicted for murder. Lawson vowed he would never go back to prison where he once had been raped.
What they ask you?
Lawson returned home that night. Being labeled a snitch was an insult to his loyalty towards the crew. And for a gang member on the streets, it was a death sentence. He was committed to gaining back the respect of the crew, proving that he was not a snitch. On November 22nd, 1994, a few days before Thanksgiving, Benny Lawson returned to Metropolitan Police Department headquarters. It was around 3:15 p.m. He was trying to locate the homicide department he had visited several days earlier.
Hey.
He asked two teenagers for directions.
If you're going that way, through that door right there.
They mistakenly led him to the cold case squad.
Okay, well, we'll see you
The
then.
team inside the office was made up of personnel from the MPD and the FBI, whose job was to breathe life into the growing number of unsolved homicide investigations. Inside the office were FBI agents Martha Dixon Martinez, John Kufta, Mike Miller, and Metropolitan Police Sergeant Hank Daly. The teenagers, who were there for a scheduled appointment, began to speak with the officers. With no warning, Lawson pulled out his M11 assault handgun and started firing. The headquarters of the Washington, D.C. police was under attack. Repeated gunfire echoed through Washington, D.C. police headquarters. Detectives raced to the third-floor office where the shooting continued. No one knew what was going on behind the locked doors of the cold case squad room.
Come on, open up the door! Open up the door!
Across town at the FBI's Washington field office,
Hey, Tony, what do you have? All right, I'll talk to you. It was just a normal day like any other day, and we were monitoring one of the police radios, and we heard a call go out that there had been a shooting at MPD headquarters.
Okay, we're on our
agents
way.
quickly determined the shooting was taking place inside the cold case office, where several FBI agents were on duty.
And very quickly, we started to page our agents that were assigned to the cold case homicide squad to try to account for all of them. And as time progressed, we weren't hearing back from some of the agents, and we realized that we might have some agents inside there. And as we listened, the calls became more serious, and they were requesting assistance.
Critically wounded, Special Agent John Kufta was trapped inside the cold case squad office. When the shooting had stopped, he could hear the shouts from officers outside the office trying to get in. Help was just a few feet away.
At that point, I heard a voice tell me they couldn't get in, and I thought to myself, you know, I'm not going to die in here. I thought of, you know, my wife, my 8-month-old daughter at the time, and I knew that if I stayed awake, if I continued to breathe, if I continued to pray, and if they got me to a hospital, I'd be alive.
Shot in the thigh, arm, stomach, neck, and chest, Kufta managed to open the door. Detectives pulled him out. The only other visible person to the rescuers was Metropolitan Police Sergeant Hank Daly. Barely clinging to life, he was dragged from the room. He was rushed outside where a helicopter waited to transport him to the hospital. Not knowing if the shooter was planning another ambush, the officers waited for the SWAT team to arrive. FBI agents and SWAT teams from around the Capitol converged on the Metropolitan Police headquarters. Yells continued from inside the room as the SWAT team arrived. Heavily armed, they entered the room. They first discovered FBI agent Mike Miller's body. His weapon was still in its holster. In an adjoining room, the SWAT team discovered the body of an unidentified black male. There was a gunshot wound on his hip and a fatal wound to his head. FBI agent Martha Dixon Martinez was the final victim found. She had gunshot wounds in her back. Near her lay the gun the shooter had likely used to kill her and the others, an M11 assault weapon. Shouts for help came from inside a closet.
Suspect in the closet, open the door slowly!
Not knowing if he was a suspect or an innocent bystander, the SWAT team apprehended one of the teens who had walked in the room before the shooting began. The other teenager had managed to flee the office earlier after being shot in the leg.
They don't even know the guy.
Supervisory Special Agent Mark Giuliano and other agents arrived at the scene.
I just remember walking through the hallway and just seeing the chaotic scene and the blood and just the total realm of emotions on everybody's face, from being focused on the mission of trying to figure out what happened and could there be other people involved.
Based on the crime scene analysis, investigators quickly reconstructed what had happened inside the room.
Getting all those shells over there?
Yes.
After Miller, Kufta, and Daly were ambushed, Agent Dixon Martinez joined the firefight. She was able to shoot the suspect in the hip before being shot in the arm, dropping her gun. The attacker took her 9mm handgun and shot the agent in the back as she tried to crawl for cover. He then put the gun to his own head and pulled the trigger. Police fingerprinted the shooter. Hopefully his identity would shed light on his actions. 2 FBI agents were dead. Sergeant Hank Daly would not survive his injuries. It would be the first time in 8 years that more than one FBI agent had been killed at a single time. It was also one of the worst attacks in history on the DC police. Agent Kufta would endure 7 major medical operations before recovering. The loss of his co-workers, Sergeant Hank Daly, Agents Mike Miller and Martha Dixon Martinez, was devastating.
Martha, Mike, and Hank were law enforcement heroes. They didn't as much lose their lives as gave their lives for a cause of justice, for a cause that they so deeply believed.
Within hours, the investigation was moving forward. The fingerprints of the shooter had come back.
When the information came up about the identity of the shooter, a detective had the information, came into a conference area where the majority of the homicide officials and detectives were, and it was announced that the shooter was Benny Lee Lawson Jr.
When homicide detective Anthony Brigadini heard the news, he realized his squad was the probable target of Lawson's rampage. Lawson and the 1st and Kennedy Street crew were the prime suspects in the triple murder of William Ragland, Darlene Hatchett, and Gerald Gaither. The shootings at headquarters showed just how far the gangs would go to protect themselves.
I think that law enforcement as a whole has learned that people operating gangs or crews are serious about what it is that they're doing. They won't stop at any cost to get their mission accomplished.
Now that federal officers had been murdered, the FBI was given jurisdiction in the investigation of the crew.
I was detailed to work jointly with the FBI to investigate the 1st and Kennedy Street crew, who at that time we felt were responsible for essentially Lawson's actions here at police headquarters.
After joining the task force, Brigadini shared what he knew about Benny Lawson and the crew. Special Agent John Kerr was on the team. For him, Benny Lawson's connection with the 1st and Kennedy Street crew raised serious questions.
Was this just a random act by Benny Lee Lawson, or were there accomplices? Did he have any help in this? Were there be any further attacks on agents and police? And so that was a reason that we opened up an investigation to answer those questions. Was this a conspiracy?
Investigators obtained a search warrant that night for the house Lawson had lived in.
Please get out! Please get out!
In his room, they uncovered a note written to the members of the DC homicide unit who had interrogated him, threatening to kill them. Gang-related materials, violent rap lyrics, and drawings of murders were everywhere. For investigators, the items in Lawson's room reflected a fixation with violence common to virtually all gang members.
It was very obvious and disturbing that these individuals were living this lifestyle. This is the lifestyle that they were a part of. This is the lifestyle that they identified with, and wanted this. They wanted to actually live the same lifestyle as the lyrics that they were writing, the pictures they were drawing, and the videos that they had.
As the victims of the shootings were laid to rest, investigators were planning their strategy to ensure that these gang members could never kill again. With 6 homicides on their hands, including 2 FBI agents and a Washington, D.C. police detective, a joint FBI MPD task force began gathering information on the 1st and Kennedy Street crew. FBI agent Mark Giuliano headed up the task force.
And our goal was to, A, investigate the crew because they were a violent street gang, and B, to try to determine what the motivation was of Benny Lee Lawson to come into police headquarters and do what he did, and to determine if there was anybody else involved at either end, either in helping him get there to pull off what he did or helping the crew afterwards to cover up what had happened.
In the wake of the shootings at MPD headquarters, police pressure on gang members increased. The crew members reacted by spending less time on the streets. Building a case against them for their criminal activity would be difficult. The crew was impenetrable to outsiders. Planting an undercover agent inside the gang was too dangerous.
What we realized is that, A, we had a very close crew. That is, they took care of each other and watched each other very closely, but they were very, very leery of outsiders. They had been leery before, but they were even more leery now, and that any attempts for us to get somebody, an agent or a police officer on the inside, was not something that we were going to even attempt to do.
Instead, agents would have to gather intelligence on the crew through covert surveillance. As time went on, the gang returned to business as usual. The FBI was watching.
We had extensive surveillance coverage of the area, day and night, identifying everyone that came onto the block identifying who the buyers were, what time of day, where did they go when they bought, did they get into a car, did they go into an alleyway, did they do it hand to hand right there in front of you. All these things we started to take notice of and document.
Through surveillance, the leaders of the crew were soon identified. Kobe Mowat and his second-in-command, Jermaine Graves, the two men in the car with Benny Lawson the night of the first triple homicide. On the streets, Mowat was known to be violent and unpredictable.
The reputation of Kobe Mowat was that of fear, that he would react quickly. At times he had a temper. He always carried a gun and could be extremely violent at times.
Looking into Kobe's past, investigators discovered he shared a common history with Graves and with Benny Lawson. Their relationship developed in 1990 while serving together in Washington, D.C.'s Lorton Prison, located in Northern Virginia. They had been arrested and convicted for weapons violations while preparing for a drive-by shooting on another gang.
Do you know what happened to me?
The task force members were convinced that Mowat and Graves played some role in all 6 murders. But the leaders of the First and Kennedy Street crew continued to keep a low profile. Agents devised a long-term strategy that would net not only Mowat and Graves, but also the entire gang membership. They would slowly build a conspiracy case against the crew that would include the entire range of their criminal activities, from crack cocaine trafficking to murder.
Off the street. Well, back in 4:30. Hang on to those for me.
Agents would work themselves inside by first targeting individuals who regularly purchased their drugs from the crew. This would allow them to watch and record the gang committing crimes. And by arresting the buyers, agents would have leverage to turn them into informants.
We'd come into an area when we thought that they'd be the most active in selling drugs. And in order to identify someone and hopefully get lucky, catch someone with some drugs, and maybe force them to work for us at some point.
Some of the buyers arrested were unwilling to cooperate at first. The dangerous reputations of Mowat and Graves were well known. But the threat of long prison sentences was powerful. The FBI strategy paid off. Threatened with significant jail time, one of the biggest drug suppliers to the crew decided to become an informant. At the FBI's direction, he would generate conversation with crew members about their illegal activities.
And he'd have conversations with them, and they like to brag about what they've done. And at our direction, he would bring something up, say an old drive-by shooting or an old murder, or something about drug dealing. And these individuals would just start to talk about it. They'd talk about who was involved, what happened. All of this was being recorded.
Through the informant and the recordings, agents learned that Mowat, Graves, and Lawson had killed previously. Less than 3 weeks before breaking into William Ragland's house, they had kidnapped and murdered another rival drug dealer.
What up, boy? What up? Huh?
William Red Billy Woods was a well-known dealer from a rival gang. Jermaine Graves arranged to lure Woods to his mother's house. Once there, Mowat, Graves, and Lawson robbed him and beat him. Fearing the rival gang would retaliate against the crew, they shot him 3 times and dumped his body in the river. Agents also heard testimony from another informant that further implicated Mowat, Graves, and Lawson in the triple murder at William Ragland's house.
Down where? First and Kennedy? Huh?
He overheard Benny, Kobe, and Jermaine Graves talking about the triple homicide. And one of the things that he mentioned that they were giving Benny a hard time for was the fact that he threw up at the scene of the triple homicide. That's something that only the homicide detectives knew and that we knew and had not been released to the public.
The information was only circumstantial, but months of surveillance and informant testimony gave agents enough evidence to obtain a search warrant for the homes of Kobe Mowat and Jermaine Graves. They would strike at Jermaine Graves first. A heavily armed SWAT team made their way inside his house.
Please get down!
No one was there.
Oh, one more.
Agents would not leave empty-handed.
We were able to locate a 9mm gun, semi-automatic pistol, as well as some crack cocaine, what we believe to be crack cocaine. One of the members on the squad took the information that we got from the gun and put together an affidavit for an arrest warrant based on the fact that it was a convicted felon in possession of a firearm.
For several weeks, Graves eluded investigators. They continued surveillance, hoping that he would turn up.
We really didn't know where he was. We had some ideas. We knew he was still in the metro area, but obviously he knew once we hit his house that we were looking for him, and word was out on the street that we were looking for him, so he was keeping a very low profile. During one of our very standard surveillances, I saw an individual who walked like Jermaine Graves, just from the back. I couldn't see his face. So I asked one of the units to drive around the block and just take a look at the guy. And the next thing I know, they jumped out and arrested him. They knew as soon as they pulled around the corner it was him. And you know, he was arrested right on the street corner of First and Kennedy.
Just a few months after the first triple murder, Graves was off the streets. Making a case against Kobe Mowat would prove more difficult. With the arrest of gang member Jermaine Graves on a weapons charge, the FBI task force was one step closer to taking the First and Kennedy crew off of the Washington, D.C. streets. Now agents were ready to serve a search warrant on the home of the crew's leader, Kobe Mowat. A SWAT team entered the house Kobe shared with his twin brother Kareem. The two never knew what hit them. Investigators found gang-related documents, drawings, and writings, and a small amount of marijuana. They found no guns or evidence of the murders. But that was not their prime interest. The task force hunted for evidence of a larger crime pattern.
Gang videos, bad videos everywhere.
Most of the evidence we were looking for at the time was list of crew members, shirts that they all wore with the logo on them, pictures, phone books, things that would associate this group together.
The twins were arrested on drug charges and taken in for booking. Kobe's time in jail was brief. Only his brother Kareem's fingerprints were on the bag of pot. Kobe was released and the possession charge was dropped. Agents were determined to see him back behind bars.
You know what?
Investigators continued developing informants from within the gang.
I know you're supplying these guys with drugs, with guns.
They got the break they were looking for. Facing jail time on a drug charge, a member of the First and Kennedy crew agreed to cooperate. Finally, investigators learned the answer to the question that had most plagued them. Why did Benny Lee Lawson go into police headquarters and kill 2 FBI agents and an MPD sergeant?
Yeah, Jimmy.
It started the night Kobe Mowat, Jermaine Graves, and Benny Lee Lawson broke into the home of William Ragland. The trio's plan had been to rob drug dealer Gerald Gaither. Jermaine Graves became frustrated by Gaither's refusal to cooperate, and he snapped, killing 3 of the residents. Overwhelmed, Benny Lawson vomited outside the home. To Mowat, it was a sign of weakness.
I'm scared, man.
Jimmy, man, he was going on.
The informant continued. When Lawson was brought in for questioning by investigators, Mowat was sure Lawson had snitched. He began to tell others in the crew that Lawson was cooperating.
He was sitting around, you know, we was at the barbershop.
Benny hated snitches. He hated them. He actually pistol whipped one individual whom he thought was snitching, and probably hated him more than any other crew member. So to have Kobe think that he was ratting or snitching on him, and to go out to First and Kennedy Street crew and have the rest of the crew look at him as a snitch, we believe was more than he could handle.
Really?
For agents and investigators, it was now clear that Kobe Mowat, Jermaine Graves, and Benny Lawson had committed the triple homicide. Agents took their case to the U.S. Attorney's Office.
Through these conversations and the cooperating witnesses, plus the information that the police had from the car stop the night of the triple murder, left us no doubt that they had enough to get a murder warrant for these guys for the triple murder.
It was also clear that Kobe Mowat was part of the reason Benny Lee Lawson murdered 3 investigators inside the Metropolitan Police Department. Agents finally felt ready to go before a grand jury and present their conspiracy case against Kobe Mowat and the entire crew. Among the 57 charges that were handed down were indictments for nearly a dozen homicides, drug trafficking, armed robbery, kidnapping, and racketeering. Already in custody, Graves was charged with 3 counts of felony murder. An arrest warrant was issued for Kobe Mowat. Investigators returned to his house. This time, he wasn't home. The closets had been emptied. The place looked like it had been abandoned. In the trash, investigators found a receipt for a plane ticket. It appeared that Kobe had kept his promise to flee rather than go to jail.
And the plane ticket was for just a few days before we hit the place. And the plane ticket was from New York to Moscow. And at that point, we knew that Kobe had most likely fled not only the area, but most likely the country.
Mowat was one step ahead of the agents. They tried to pick up his trail in Russia, but he was nowhere to be found. Investigators discovered there was a flight departing to Africa soon after he landed in Moscow. A check of the passenger list revealed nothing.
There you are, sir.
Agents grew increasingly more frustrated. Mowat was slipping away. For 6 months, FBI agents and Washington, D.C. police tried to track fugitive Kobe Mowat. He could be hiding anywhere. An international manhunt was underway.
We literally went months without a break. We went through hundreds and hundreds of documents that we had obtained during search warrants, during various parts of the investigation, looking for overseas phone numbers, looking for overseas relatives, once again, without a break.
After several months, Agent John Kerr got a break. Through an informant, he uncovered the name of an ex-girlfriend of Kobe's.
We had come up with addresses for her. One of the addresses we came up with, we subpoenaed the toll records, and sure enough, we found a collect call from Kenya on one of her toll records. And this was shortly after he would have arrived in Africa.
Agents brought her in for questioning. She repeatedly denied knowing anything about Kobe Mowat's whereabouts.
He's out killing people.
Agents confronted her about the phone records. If she continued to withhold information, they would serve her with a grand jury subpoena. She decided to cooperate. She told investigators that Kobe had in fact called her several times from Nairobi, Kenya. He had not called her recently. She believed he might have moved on to Tanzania. The information was immediately passed on overseas.
You have to know where he is.
Moat's phone call to his ex-girlfriend had originated from a hotel in Nairobi. A U.S. Department of State regional security officer in Kenya followed the lead.
We know he stayed in your hotel.
The hotel owner said he had no recollection of Kobe Moat. Agent Giuliano received the news.
And it becomes very, very frustrating because, once again, we're getting no new information. We're not getting a break. And we know that the only tie that we have now is this hotel in Nairobi, Kenya. So we go back to the regional security officers and ask them to go back out and re-interview the individual.
Again, the hotel owner insisted he knew nothing about Kobe Moat. When shown photographs, he seemed to hesitate. The regional security officer kept pressing. Finally, the owner asked for a guarantee that if he gave information, Kobe would never be told. The regional security officer agreed to protect him. He said Kobe had in fact been to his hotel, but he had left several months ago. He gave the security officer a number that Kobe had called while at the hotel. The call was to the East African country of Tanzania. It took agents a few days to determine why the hotel owner protected the First and Kennedy Street crew leader.
What we determined is that Kobe's mother was educated in Jamaica, and during that process she had befriended several individuals who ended up going to various parts of the world. She had an association with this hotel owner in Nairobi, and she had made the contact to protect Kobe and to help him.
You have a nice day.
Thank you.
The phone number in Tanzania eventually led investigators to a local college professor. He was a friend of Kobe Moat's mother. The FBI asked the Tanzanian National Police Department to follow the lead. The professor was unwilling to cooperate with the authorities.
Certainly not a student.
The National Police began their own investigation into Kobe Moat's whereabouts in their country. As the search for the gang leader intensified in Tanzania, agents and police in Washington, D.C. continued to build their case against the First and Kennedy crew. They amassed volumes of evidence through surveillance and informant testimony over the previous year.
There were about 20 to 25 Metropolitan Police Department officers and FBI special agents working on this investigation around the clock, whether it was determining phone records or uncovering new murders that these guys had committed over the years.
On September 14th, 1995, officers and agents executed over a dozen arrest warrants. They searched for any indication of the gang leader's whereabouts in Africa. They found nothing. They collected additional evidence of a criminal enterprise. They confiscated financial records, guns, drugs, and gang paraphernalia.
Stay right there. Don't move.
Some of those arrested agreed to cooperate in exchange for less jail time. Investigators were slowly taking all of the gang members off the streets. In Tanzania, the search for Kobe Moat was heating up. The National Police Force developed their own informants and learned that Moat had in fact been in contact with a university professor.
I don't know anything about Kobe. Perhaps I could take you on a small...
They returned to interview him. He once more denied knowing anything about Kobe. threatening the Jamaican-born professor with deportation, the Tanzanian police convinced him to reconsider. Finally, he admitted to helping Mowat find a place to hide out. He offered to take the authorities there.
And this hut is literally out in the middle of the tribespeople who are living in straw huts or are actually just living on the ground, right amongst the wild animals and amongst where they grow their crops.
It was the last place on earth authorities would have thought to look for Mowat. Unaware that the professor had betrayed his location, Mowat was surprised to see the police approaching his hut. He set fire to anything that could potentially identify him. But the police quickly moved in and doused the flames.
What did I do?
While they searched for a reason to place him in custody, they never told Mowat why they were there.
They also determined that out in the back, he's growing a small amount of marijuana, or what they call bangi. And in that part of the country, it's against the law. And the penalty is 10 years in prison or $100. So they bought him in based on that premise, telling him that he was going to be incarcerated for that.
Investigators in Washington received the news that Mowat was in custody, but time was working against them. The Tanzanian police could only hold Kobe on the possession charge for a short period. As a drug trafficker, Mowat had plenty of cash on hand to pay the $100 fine. After days of diplomatic wrangling, the arrangements for Mowat's extradition to the United States were finalized. Agent Giuliano and Detective Brigadini traveled to Tanzania to take him into custody. Investigators were finally face to face with the man who had eluded them for over a year.
When he came in, Kobe looked tired, and he looked like he had been defeated. We explained to him what the charges were, that he was being removed to the United States, that he had been indicted in the United States for a variety of charges, including several counts of first-degree murder and racketeering.
Mowat was on his way back to the United States, where he and fellow gang members faced 57 indictments. Kobe Mowat and Jermaine Graves would be convicted on all counts. They were each sentenced to 35 years in a federal prison. Mowat's capture in Africa allowed investigators to get the remaining First and Kennedy crew members off the streets.
When we brought Kobe back to the United States, he just had a domino effect on the rest of the crew members. Eventually, every crew member pled guilty because they felt and actually told us that once they saw that we had found Kobe in East Africa and brought him back, that they felt they didn't stand a chance.
FBI agents and DC police worked tirelessly to bring justice to the victims of gang violence. But this case was also personal. Only after the entire gang was in jail could they have a sense of closure and feel they had vindicated the deaths of their friends. Sergeant Hank Daly and FBI agents Mike Miller and Martha Dixon Martinez. For Agent John Kufta, who barely survived the attack at police headquarters, the implications of this case were far-reaching.
When this group was locked up, I think it sent a clear message to other criminal organizations out there operating in the District of Columbia and in that tri-state area there, that the FBI and the DC police will go to whatever lengths are necessary if it takes them to other continents to track you down and find you and bring you back to the United States to justice.
An armored car vanished during a routine stop. Carrying nearly $1 million, it was supposed to be impenetrable. Investigators didn't know if the driver was involved or if he had been ambushed. FBI agents and local detectives began to suspect a group of former law officers in the heist. It would take determination and high technology to track the robbers and make them pay for their silent strike.
Money may not be the root of all evil, but for some men, $1 million is enough to justify murder. Even men sworn to uphold the law can sometimes be tempted. I'm Jim Kallstrom, former head of the FBI's New York office. When robbery turned to murder, the FBI would discover that a killer might be among them.
The Arrowhead Mall, Glendale, Arizona. November 28, 1994. At 1:30 p.m., a van pulled up outside a department store at the mall. It was an unmarked, fully armored Wells Fargo vehicle. Several companies use these customized vans since they are less conspicuous targets for robbery. Following company protocol, the driver remained inside the van while the courier went to pick up cash from the store. The van was bulletproof, and its doors could not be forced open from the outside. Inside the department store office, the courier exchanged empty bags for those filled with the weekend's receipts. It was the Monday after Thanksgiving. The cash pickup followed the busiest shopping weekend of the year. When the courier returned to the parking lot minutes later, the armored van and the driver were gone. He notified police immediately. The 911 call came to the Glendale, Arizona Police Department. They dispatched units to the scene and sent word to the FBI. The nearest FBI field office is in Phoenix, 20 miles from the mall. Because the money in the van was federally insured, the FBI opened a case. Agents headed out to the scene. Glendale detectives arrived at the mall first. They began interviewing the courier. He said he had been gone only 4 minutes when he discovered the van and his partner, John McGosh, had disappeared. The courier estimated the amount of cash, checks, and coins in the van to be just over $1 million. Detectives interviewed others at the mall. None reported seeing or hearing anything unusual. FBI agents soon arrived from Phoenix. Evidence technicians had processed the area. Where the van had been parked, they found a cigarette butt and a pair of broken eyeglasses. The courier confirmed that his partner was a smoker and said the glasses looked like those McGosh needed when he drove. The technicians collected and marked the items as evidence.
David 44 to David
Detective
41.
Tom Clayton is a senior investigator for the Glendale Police Department.
On the 211 TIFL. I think the first thought when we saw the van missing was the driver took off with the money and was going to leave town. We also considered somebody could have robbed him. With the glasses laying there, we weren't sure if it's, was it a setup or did something really happen. We explored every possibility we could think of.
Okay, van was
Supervisory Special Agent Stephen Chenoweth, now retired, was the lead for the FBI.
in increments going outward, so how do you think best to do that?
The investigators organized a search for the van and its driver, believing that whoever took the van would abandon it soon in favor of a getaway car. They dispatched some officers to begin a ground search around the mall. Pilots from the Arizona Department of Public Safety conducted an aerial search. The DPS officers began at the mall, then widened their search in concentric circles, looking for the van in the surrounding neighborhoods. Whenever they spotted a white van, they radioed ground units to follow up. Special Agent Chenoweth and the others knew most armored car robberies are inside jobs or armed ambushes. Witnesses hadn't heard shooting. Perhaps the driver had decided to trade his hourly wage for $1 million.
Certainly, the van is supposed to be locked and the driver inside, and therefore inaccessible. The fact that the van is missing would lead us to initially at least think about the possibility of the guard driver being involved.
Investigators sought more information on the missing driver.
We investigated John McGosh. First off, we started running his name in the computer to see if we could find any arrests or if he had a criminal history. We started to the Wells Fargo file, his employment file, looking for relatives, friends, where he lived.
After securing a search warrant, investigators traveled to his apartment. His landlady let them in. The investigators were looking for evidence that McGosh had planned the robbery. The apartment appeared undisturbed. Nothing indicated he had planned the robbery or that he was ready to leave town.
Do you know who this is?
Yes. That's Lisa Johnson.
Detectives learned that McGosh had a daughter living nearby in Phoenix.
Live here? All right. Does she live here?
Determining her address through DMV records,
Johnson,
they went to interview her.
Glendale Police. Detective Myers, Detective Clayton. Can I talk to you for just a moment?
McGosh's daughter described her father as honest and stable.
Who he might contact other than yourself?
He took his job seriously. Police found others who said the same. McGosh had no criminal record.
Well, right now, your father and the
Detectives began to consider the 61-year-old grandfather not as a suspect, but as a victim.
John McGosh had a good reputation. We talked to family, friends, relatives, co-workers. He was a person that did not have a lot of requirements in life. Money wasn't a big concern. Based on the background we did on him, we didn't believe he was going to be involved in the crime.
With McGosh eliminated as a suspect, the investigators were back to square one. They needed the public's help.
Certainly when you don't have eyewitnesses, you try and put as much information out in the form of press releases, newspaper articles, things of this nature, in hopes that it would reach somebody that maybe saw something that otherwise had not heard about it.
That afternoon, the FBI and Glendale police held a press
wanted to give you an
conference.
update on bank heist outside the mall earlier. We do
They released photos and descriptions of the missing van and driver.
As of yet, we have very little.
Anyone who had seen John McGosh or the Wells Fargo van was asked to contact the FBI.
Investigation without assistance.
A reward of $60,000 was posted for any tip leading to the recovery of the money and the conviction of those involved.
Anyone who may know where the van is at this point.
Hours later, a 911 call came in from a church in Sun City, Arizona, just outside Glendale. The caller reported a van idling in the church's parking lot. Parishioners arriving for a Monday night bingo game noticed the van, which fit the description in the news reports. License plates and serial numbers confirmed it was the van missing from the mall. Investigators approached cautiously, not knowing who or what was inside. No one was in the driver's seat, but investigators could see the outline of a body on the floor. They tried to open the van, but the armored vehicle was impenetrable, even to the agents.
The engine was going, it was locked, and a cursory examination initially of the inside disclosed the body lying in the center. In order to gain access to the van, of course, we had to call the armored car company.
No one at the church had seen who left the van or what vehicle they used to get away.
Notice anybody else around?
Checking the body through the window, police could see blood on the chest near a Wells Fargo badge. There was no sign of breathing. Authorities believed John McGosh had been killed during the robbery. There were no bullet marks on the van's exterior, no broken glass, and no sign of forced entry at the doors. Whoever had hit the van knew what they were doing.
An armored car robbery is a pretty sophisticated crime, and it takes a lot of detailed planning. And so we knew after finding the van and finding the body that we were up against probably some people who had thought this out very well, planned it extensively, and certainly would not stop at murder in carrying this out.
Investigators needed to get inside the van to know what happened. On November 28, 1994, the FBI and Glendale, Arizona police investigated an armored van hijacked from a mall and abandoned in a church parking lot in nearby Sun City. The driver, 61-year-old John McGosh, lay dead in the cab. He had been shot once in the head, but his death was not instantaneous. Technicians noted aspirated blood spatter, indicating McGosh had continued breathing after being shot. Technicians lifted many latent prints from money cabinets in the van's interior. These would be compared to known prints of employees. No foreign prints were found. No hairs or fibers pointed toward a suspect either. Inside the van, investigators found $132,000 in coins. The cash and checks, estimated at $920,000, were gone. The details of the crime suggested that there had been several violent criminals, according to Special Agent Stephen Chenoweth.
After looking at the van, we knew that we were probably dealing with certainly more than one person, because this would be very difficult for one person to accomplish. So we knew we were looking probably at least two or more, and very vicious and violent people who certainly would not stop at anything in order to obtain their goals, which was the money located inside the van.
To Glendale Detective Tom Clayton, the placement of the van outside Glendale city limits spoke to the criminal's understanding of police procedure.
We believed they dumped the van in Sun City to get it out of our jurisdiction into another one, to complicate the investigation and communication of police agencies, maybe hoping we would not be able to link the two things together right away.
During the autopsy of the armored car driver, the medical examiner retrieved several small bullet fragments from the left side of the victim's head. The fragments were too damaged to determine the make of the murder weapon. It seemed like a small caliber, perhaps a .22. The medical examiner found no powder burns on the victim's head. This meant he had been shot from a distance. Magash's partner said the driver often smoked a cigarette while waiting in the van. Though it was against company policy, he usually opened his door to let the smoke out. Investigators believed the killers knew this and shot him when he opened the door. Because of his experience tracking down elusive criminals, now retired FBI Special Agent Ron Myers was transferred from the Fugitive Task Force to work the case. From the beginning, he knew they were not hunting amateurs.
One of the things they did that made us think that they were professionals was the manner in which they did the robbery. They picked an isolated part of the shopping center where not many people parked, where there wouldn't be many witnesses. They drove through the type of neighborhoods where there weren't many people out during the day, and they picked an empty parking lot of a church that had no one at it during the day.
Go right in here, sir.
Investigators received dozens of calls to their tip line. One witness came forward, claiming to have some information that might be helpful. He said he had seen a white van quickly leaving the mall at the time in question. A red pickup truck followed not far behind, but he wasn't sure if the two vehicles were together. Investigators were frustrated that no one saw the actual ambush at the mall.
We couldn't find any eyewitnesses. And when you don't really know what happened, or you don't have somebody that can tell you what maybe transpired with the van, it's a mystery.
With no other solid leads, investigators canvassed the neighborhoods between the mall and the church. Perhaps someone there had witnessed something.
They almost got ran over.
Edward Morgan, a resident of Sun City, recalled that he had seen the van. On the afternoon of November 28th, Mr. Morgan was returning from the post office when he noticed the van.
And Mr. Morgan stopped because he thought they weren't going to stop for the stop sign and was afraid he'd be hit. At that time, he noticed the white van with this red truck shortly behind it, both speeding through the intersection and driving off. And he thought that was kind of unusual, not only the way they were driving, but the way that the red truck seemed to be following the white van.
I think they were doing...
Mr. Morgan couldn't recall details of license plates or the face of the van's passenger. Desperate for a break, investigators wanted to place him under hypnosis to jog his memory. Morgan agreed to travel to Texas with the investigators. There they met with a forensic hypnotist. Perhaps under hypnosis, the witness could remember more details about the incident. Statements made under hypnosis cannot be used in court, but some police agencies find it to be a helpful investigative tool. Under hypnosis, Morgan returned to the events of November 28th. He recalled the white van and the man in the passenger seat. Investigators now believe there were at least 3 people involved in the heist, 2 in the van and 1 in the red truck. When asked about the truck's license plate, Morgan was able to remember a portion.
237. Very good.
It wasn't much, but it gave investigators a start.
We had to go to the Department of Motor Vehicles to run all combinations of those license numbers, and that produced several hundred possible vehicles because Arizona does not have color on their motor vehicle registration. So we knew we were looking for a particular type of truck, but from looking at the motor vehicle registrations, we didn't know what color they were on the registration, which meant we had to do interviews of everybody on the list.
Investigators eventually tracked down hundreds of truck owners. Each was interviewed, but no suspect emerged. With his refreshed memory of the van's passenger, Morgan worked with a police sketch artist. There was no guarantee that the details recalled through hypnosis were accurate, but authorities were ready to try almost anything. The FBI released the drawing to the media.
For nearly a month now, police and FBI have continued looking for suspects in the global armored...
The FBI and Glendale, Arizona police believed 3 men were involved in the robbery homicide. Yet, as the end of 1994 approached, they still didn't have suspects. It began to look like the killers might never be found.
Martha, do you have the TV on?
But the investigators did not know that the suspect in the composite sketch had been recognized.
Can you call me back? Call me back in like 10 minutes.
By December of 1994, a month after the deadly hijacking of an armored car in Glendale, Arizona, the investigation had stalled. Investigators believed at least 3 people pulled off the heist. They had a composite sketch of one and little else. Then, on December 31st, the investigators received a call. A Mesa, Arizona detective had been told that a local woman had information about the crime.
Okay, thanks.
A background check showed that the woman had a suspended license. This would make it easy to bring her in for questioning without arousing suspicions. The FBI asked local law enforcement to pick her up on the suspended license charge. The investigators asked the woman if she knew anything about the armored car robbery in Glendale. She claimed that she didn't have any real information, but she knew someone who did.
We talked on the phone just a few days ago.
Could you write it down for us?
She told investigators that her friend, Judy Espinoza, had talked to her after the news reports of the robbery.
Looks just like him.
Espinoza suspected that her boyfriend might have been involved.
Are you watching it? Right. Right. They're saying he might be connected with the armored car.
The woman told the investigators where Espinoza worked. The investigators spoke with Espinoza.
Good afternoon, Miss Espinoza. I am...
They asked her about the robbery, reminding her that interfering with a federal investigation was itself a crime. She agreed to answer their questions. She explained that her boyfriend, James Greenham, who went by the nickname Yoda, had asked her what she would do if he held up an armored car and suddenly had a lot of money. She told FBI Special Agent Ron Myers that Greenham sometimes worked as a bounty hunter and was usually broke.
Jim never had a dime, but the day of the robbery, he came home that night, told her he had to kill somebody, and he had plenty of cash on his person. She told us that Jim did his bounty hunting with a guy named Tim Ring, and that she had been over to Tim Ring's house and noticed several new all-terrain vehicles, jet skis, a new motorcycle, and Tim had made a comment about how she'd never know how much money was in that garage.
The information was good, but it was only hearsay. Investigators needed more solid evidence. Espinoza had kept several rolls of coins that Greenham had given her. The wrappers were consistent with those used by merchants on the armored van's route. More than a month after the crime, the investigators finally had names. They looked into the two suspects' backgrounds. FBI Special Agent Stephen Chenoweth was familiar with the name of one of the men. Tim Ring had been used as an informant in other FBI cases.
We had paid him for some information that he had furnished us in the past, and you know, in order for us to get information from informants, you aren't dealing with priests and with you know good people. You're dealing with bad guys out there, and Ring's a bad guy.
And when you're ready, focused, squeeze the trigger.
Tim Ring and James Greenham had worked as prison guards in Phoenix and now worked bounty hunter jobs together.
Front sight or through the crosshairs.
Both had many hours of firearms training.
Any questions? Okay, Joan.
Ring was an expert marksman.
Fire when ready.
Pursuing bounty hunters would be dangerous.
The fact that these suspects had law enforcement training in their background made the case pretty difficult. For one, they would be schooled in surveillance techniques. If they were looking for somebody following them, they'd know what to look for. They'd know what to expect anybody following them to do. So we had to be very cautious when we were following them around.
The FBI and Glendale police began 24-hour ground and air surveillance. They had to be covert.
You know, if they're looking for air surveillance, they're looking up, you know. Well, we're way over here, because we can't see anything if we're right up here, you know. So we're way over here, way over here.
The agents wanted to see how the pair earned money and how much they spent.
At the time that we were following Mr. Greenham and Mr. Ring around, neither one was gainfully employed that we could tell. They had no income coming in from any legitimate sources, yet we observed them spending a lot of money.
Ring overhauled his truck and Greenham got a new apartment. Both bought motorcycles. Agents tracked their purchases. It seemed the suspects did not exceed a certain level in order to avoid the attention of the Internal Revenue Service.
Okay.
And they always seemed to be careful whenever they spent their money to stay under the $10,000 limit, knowing that if they spent more than that in cash, the expenditure would be reported by the businesses to the IRS.
Investigators continued tailing Ring and Greenham, building a list of associates. They photographed everyone the suspects met. They still didn't know who the third partner was. Glendale detective Tom Clayton hoped surveillance would spot the three meeting somewhere.
We would watch them go to restaurants where they would meet. We would see them go to strip clubs where they met a couple dancers that they knew.
Everywhere they went, the suspects spent a lot of cash, unaware that investigators were watching. Circumstantial evidence linked them to the robbery and homicide. But the FBI and Glendale police still didn't know exactly what had happened and who else was involved. Somehow, the investigators had to get inside the bounty hunter's shadowy world. As the FBI and Glendale, Arizona police continued to investigate a deadly armored car heist, they got a tip from an associate of their two main suspects. Bounty hunter Michael Sanders said that he had cased armored cars with two other men. He believed those men did the Glendale hit without him. Angry at being cut out of the deal, he decided to talk. He gave FBI Special Agent Ron Myers a lead on the third perpetrator.
Sanders came forward to tell us that he thought that Tim Ring and Jim Greenham were involved in this armored car robbery, and that an ex-Phoenix police officer named Fergie, who worked for a camera shop in the Paradise Valley Mall, might be the third man.
Investigators needed to identify Fergie.
So what we're going to do is
they reviewed their case
set up on
photos.
Tonight, try to take some pictures and get a bunch for that guy there too.
Surveillance teams had watched Ring and Greenham meeting with a bearded man who drove a Camaro. The car was registered to William Ferguson. Since Sanders said Fergie was an ex-cop, Glendale detective Tom Clayton checked the personnel records of the Phoenix Police Department.
As we investigated William Ferguson's background, we found he retired at 20 years from the Phoenix Police Department, and his retirement was precipitated by some disciplinary problems.
Investigators began surveillance on Ferguson. They saw that the ex-cop met often with the other suspects and was also spending a lot of cash. Agents believed they had identified the three men responsible for the robbery and murder.
The investigation was affected by the three suspects having law enforcement training because we knew that they were going to cover evidence, and they were also known to have firearms training, which made them dangerous to the surveillance officers.
Detectives and agents needed evidence linking the men to the crime. During surveillance, they began trash pulls, confiscating trash bags from the suspects in the hopes that some clues might surface. FBI technicians examined the trash. In rings, they found several 3x5 index cards. Each card had notes detailing armored car routes. Analysis confirmed the handwriting was Ring's. But investigators needed more. They wanted tapes of the suspects discussing the crime. All three men had keys to James Greenham's apartment. FBI Special Agent Stephen Chenoweth believed they used the apartment as headquarters.
Timothy Ring was married, had a wife, children, and I think the likelihood of discussions occurring in regards to this armored car robbery at his house were somewhat remote. But we felt that they were occurring at Greenham's residence, so that was the impetus for which we decided to go ahead and proceed and place a listening device inside the apartment of Greenham.
Special Agent Myers was part of the team that entered the apartment to place the bug.
When we opened the door to go in, an alarm went off immediately, at which point we shut the door and exited the area. We had to come back at a later time with an expert in alarms, and when we went in the door that time, we learned that it was just a real simple motion detector sitting on top of the refrigerator, and all we had to do was just flip the off switch. It wasn't anything sophisticated at all.
While the team was inside Greenham's apartment, the detective surveilling Tim Ring saw him leave his house. Ring owned a red truck like the one reportedly seen following the van. The detective trailed behind Ring. After a few turns, he realized where the suspect was headed. Agents were still in the apartment. Tim Ring was headed that way. Ring often went to Greenham's place, even when Greenham was out. If he went to the apartment, he would interrupt the planting of the bug.
His license is under suspension. Then run his plate.
The team inside needed more time.
I'll pull him over and hold him until you get her.
The detective called in a uniformed officer to stop Ring for speeding. Anything to delay the suspect.
Good evening, sir. What's the problem?
The officer lectured Ring on the dangers of speeding. Detectives wanted to keep him busy while the team finished at the apartment.
Let's go, gang. They're on their way over. Okay, put everything away. Let's get this thing back.
They made it out just before Ring arrived.
Some notices in the rec center.
Investigators also tapped the home and cellular phones of the two other suspects. To get them talking, Supervisory Special Agent Stephen Chenoweth released false information about the case.
We decided to make a press release talking about the investigation, which we thought when they would hear would certainly generate some telephone conversations and other discussions amongst these three suspects. And it did have its desired effect in that they did talk about the information that we released and how accurate they thought it was, and whether or not we were on the right trail, and whether or not they thought we were getting close to them.
As the suspects talked, the investigators listened.
We didn't get an actual confession where they said, I did the armored car robbery. What we got were several conversations among themselves about different aspects of the case. They would always listen to the news, follow any printed reports or follow any television stories, and as soon as anything would appear on TV, they'd call each other. And they'd make comments like, well, this isn't the way it happened. You know, they'll never find that license plate.
The evidence against the suspects was building.
Man, you seen Judy lately?
But prosecutors wanted more direct statements about the crime before they ordered arrests. Investigators provoked the suspects one more time. A Glendale detective went to James Greenham's apartment when the suspect was out. On the door, he left his business card with the note, Lead 173. Investigators watched Greenham's response to the card. He knew what the note meant. The authorities considered him a lead. Greenham became distraught. He sped away from his apartment, calling Tim Ring on his cell phone. Agents kept watch from an airplane and listened in on the phone taps.
Tim, man, listen.
Greenham drove out into the desert before stopping.
Business card in my door.
Look, man, they ain't got nothing on you. Don't worry about it.
Ring tried to calm Greenham down, promising that the authorities had nothing on them.
Everything's, don't worry about it.
But Greenham said he was scared.
I can't do this anymore.
He even threatened to commit suicide.
Just don't do something
Finally,
stupid.
Ring talked Greenham down, convincing him the authorities were not onto them.
But if I see one more cop,
Greenham said that if another cop contacted him, he was going to bury the money. It seemed a direct reference to the crime.
Sam 40.
Investigators felt they
Contact
finally
unauthorized
had enough
suspects,
evidence.
Greenway and 6th Avenue. Continuing search northbound.
They sent units to arrest Greenham and Ferguson.
Jim Greenham was arrested by one team. William Ferguson was arrested by another and attempted to resist arrest but was quickly subdued. Tim Ring was lured down to the FBI office on the premise of looking at some photographs because Ring had previously offered to help the FBI try to find who these people were, which we believe was an effort on his part to try and find out what we knew.
The FBI agent who had previously used Ring as an informant called the suspect. Ring agreed to come in. On February 16, 1995, Tim Ring arrived at the Phoenix FBI field office. Undercover agents were waiting for him in the lobby. They believed he would not be armed at the FBI office, but they couldn't be positive. To ensure their safety, they needed to surprise him.
We had two big burly defensive tactics instructors, one of which was a guy with 25 years of martial arts expertise who came up and whopped him in the head and knocked him down like a sack of potatoes before he knew what he was doing.
All three suspects were off the streets. Now investigators needed physical evidence to make sure the prosecutions were successful. On February 16, 1995, after arresting 3 men for an armored car robbery and murder, FBI agents and Glendale, Arizona detectives searched the suspects' residences. At the house of Tim Ring, suspected leader of the 3, they found important evidence. Investigators recovered a note marked with the initials F, Y, and T. Each initial had a number beneath.
Like serial numbers from
The numbers added up to the amount of cash taken from the armored car. Agents believed F stood for Fergie, Y for Greenham's nickname Yoda, and T for Tim. It was the worksheet the 3 used to divide the money. In the garage, investigators found a red pickup truck that resembled the vehicle seen by witness Edward Morgan in Sun City. The license plate number, however, did not match the ones Morgan recalled under forensic hypnosis. Ring kept several weapons and plenty of ammunition at his house. In a duffel bag, agents also recovered $270,000 in cash. Another $64,000 was found at Ferguson's house.
We need to count all of it.
Nearly $600,000 in cash had been stolen. Noting the money spent by the suspects, investigators found that about $100,000 was unaccounted for. The case against the 3 suspects seemed solid. FBI Special Agent Ron Myers hoped the evidence might get one of them to roll.
We finally got first-hand information about this crime when Jim Greenham decided to cooperate. Jim Greenham was the only one of the 3 of them that showed any remorse about what they had done, about how they had killed this driver. Jim decided to cooperate. He told us what happened. He told us all the parts that these individuals played in the robbery.
Greenham met with the investigators and explained that the planning started in the fall of 1994.
Ferguson and I just watched when
Tim Ring had the idea to hit an armored car.
I wasn't crazy about the fact that he was going to kill him.
What were you planning on
So they began to case Wells Fargo vehicles. They drove around Glendale, following different trucks and vans on their routes. Then they zeroed in on the van driven by John McGosh, tailing it for days.
They managed to observe this one particular armored car making several stops, and they noticed that every time the messenger would get out to make a delivery, the driver would open the door about 8 inches to smoke and blow the smoke out the side of the door. They observed the driver at several stops, and they noticed this one particular stop on the back side of a shopping center and noticed that he always parked in the same position.
On November 28, 1994, the Monday after Thanksgiving, a day they were sure a lot of money would be in the van, they were ready to strike. James Greenham and William Ferguson waited unnoticed by the store. They watched until the courier was out of sight. As if on schedule, McGosh opened the door to smoke. Tim Ring was parked 50 feet away, a stolen license plate on his truck. The expert marksman had a silencer on his .22 caliber rifle so no one would hear the shot. He aimed through the opening and fired once. The force must have knocked McGosh's glasses to the ground. With the driver down, the van was unprotected. No one noticed the vehicle speed away. They drove to the church parking lot. It would be empty at that time of day. They transferred the money and checks to the pickup. They knew authorities would be searching for the van. They left most of the coins and went to destroy the checks and other evidence, according to Detective Tom Clayton.
They loaded the money into Tim Ring's truck and drove out in the desert where they separated the money, changed clothes, and burned all the evidence.
We buried the license plate.
Greenham said they buried the burned evidence and stolen license plate in the desert.
And you can take us to where the plates are buried?
Yeah.
Special Agent Stephen Chenoweth wondered if it was the plate witnessed by Edward Morgan.
We went out there and actually found the location and then dug it up and found that the 3 numbers actually on the plate did in fact match those that were given to us by Mr. Morgan. So he was actually right on his information.
James Greenham pled guilty to second-degree murder and armed robbery and is serving 27.5 years. William Ferguson pled guilty to armed robbery and accessory after the fact and is doing 17 years. On December 6, 1996, Tim Ring was found guilty of first-degree murder, conspiracy, and burglary.
Anytime that you have somebody actually assassinate a driver like this, it's a very heinous crime, and you certainly want to expend all of your resources in an effort to identify the people involved and put them behind bars.
For his crimes, Ring received the death penalty. He currently awaits execution at the Arizona State Prison in Florence.